Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Trump's tariff threat looms as premiers finalize their response plan. Plus, protests in Calgary as the Grassy Mountain coal mining hearing resumes. And over 3,000 educational support workers continue to strike north of Edmonton.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Doug Ford says he has yet to see anything in terms of a border security plan that could deter U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on Canadian goods. The Ontario Premier is reacting to Ottawa's pledge to spend $1.3 billion to tackle the issue, but he says it's not moving quickly enough. Estimates say that Ontario could lose almost 500,000 jobs if the U.S. tariffs are imposed.
Unfortunately, it's going to hurt Ontario and Canadian jobs, but I can assure our American friends it's going to hurt them just as much. But I was getting numbers yesterday from the ministries. It could cost 500,000 jobs. These tariffs will affect every single person. Even if they don't think they're tariffed in their sector, it's going to indirectly affect them. It's not going to be good. I'll tell you that right now. We need the federal government to step up with a solid plan. We heard a number thrown out there, $1.3 billion for our border protection. Have yet to see anything, nothing at all. Minister McGuinty, he needs to come out of hiding and get out there and start voicing his plan.
Despite Ford's criticism, the Saskatchewan government says it's sending 16 provincial law enforcement officers to the Canada-U.S. border to shore up security. Premier Scott Moe says the officers are to be equipped with a mobile command unit, license plate readers, drones, snowmobiles, and 3 planes. The officers are to be drawn from the province's Conservation, Highway Patrol, and K-9 handler teams. Incoming President-elect Donald Trump has raised concerns about security at the border while promising to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian goods.
We've worked closely with our federal government on border security, enhancing our border security, because herein lies an opportunity for us, not just as Canadians, but to do our part to ensure that we have a secure border on behalf of everyone that lives in North America, whether that be drugs, whether that be asylum seekers, whether it be illegal migrants, but to work together hand in hand with the American administration.
All 13 premiers are set to meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tomorrow to finalize a plan of how to respond to the tariffs. And it sounds, by what some of them have said, they are not united in how they want to deal with Trump and his threats of tariffs. Brian Lilly, Toronto Sun columnist, explains.
Premier Fury out in Newfoundland and Labrador, he just wants to fight the Americans, was my takeaway. Well, that's great. Newfoundland and Labrador, guess what? They don't have a direct border connection with the United States. They're a very small population. They're a very small economy. Doesn't matter to them compared to Alberta or even more so Ontario. You talk to David Eby in British Columbia. He wants to fight the Americans. It's this anti-American, let's go, rah, rah. Look, I get that can be a bit of a rallying cry, but economically, it is stupid.
Catch that full interview with Brian Lilly coming up after Business News, where he will also update us on the Liberal leadership race and Mark Carney's alleged connection to Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. Former BC Premier Christy Clark has decided not to seek the federal Liberal leadership. In a note to supporters, Clark says there's not enough time for her to mount a successful campaign and renew the party. Clark's announcement comes just days after she was forced to backtrack from her claim during a CBC interview that she was never a member of the Conservative Party. Liberal candidates face a fast-approaching cutoff date of January 27th to sign up for the race. On Monday, Federal Transport Minister Anita Anand announced she would also not be joining the race. Although yet to confirm he is running in the leadership race to replace Justin Trudeau, a new poll is suggesting Mark Carney is the top choice among supporters. Polling firm Leger surveyed around 1,500 people over the weekend, asking who they think should replace Justin Trudeau as leader of the governing party. But the majority, 78% of those polled, suggests Canadians are concerned most about the federal government's ability to handle Canada-U.S. relations. Well, some weeks have passed since Donald Trump proposed to annex Canada as the 51st state of the United States. What at first sounded like a bad joke has gained strength. Our BCN's Heidi Echeverria went to the streets to talk to experts and Canadians about this.
Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like. And it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
This idea continues to generate controversy among Canadians. But what is the opinion of experts in the economic area of Lethbridge on the matter? The CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, Trevor Lewington, talk about this issue.
I mean, clearly it started out that most people thought Trump was joking. As he continues to talk about it, more and more people are starting to take this very seriously. At the end of the day, I think Canadians are very proud to be Canadians. When we've looked at polls, there's been polls conducted since Trump started making these comments, and only about 12 to 15% of Canadians actually support becoming a part of the United States. So the vast majority of Canadians have no interest in being part of the USA. Politicians from the Liberals to the Conservatives across the political spectrum have all said the same thing: thanks, but no thanks. There's no question that the threat of tariffs will have a very significant impact on Canada. A 25% tariff on everything we export to the US is going to do some serious financial damage to the Canadian economy. And in the next few months, I think it could be very painful. But the solution isn't necessarily just better integration with the US. Canada is a relatively small population and a relatively small economy when compared to the US. So even if we were hypothetically to join the US, we would have less standing and less clout than most of the large US states, California and Texas, for example. So simply joining the US is not a solution. However, we can look at reducing trade barriers within our own country, as well as improving our relationship with other countries that we do business with, like Europe and Asia. The real concern is the short-term damage to the economy and the maneuvering. Trump has been very clear. He plans to use what he calls economic force or economic coercion to make Canadians think twice about, maintaining the sovereignty of our country. And I think we should be prepared for a very unstable economy and changes in our fluctuation, and there's real risk in the next few months as these threats come to be reality. Alberta, I think, is very different than the rest of Canada for a couple of reasons. First, it's important to remember that 90% of our exports going out of Alberta go to the US. The United States is our single biggest customer. So there's no question Alberta has a very strong economic integration. And we also have very strong ties with the states that are to our south. We have very strong partnerships and trade relationships with Montana. We have a very strong connection with Utah. So I think make it perhaps a little bit different than the rest of the country.
We also talked with Canadians about this proposal, and this is what they had to say.
I think I speak for a lot of Albertans that would probably rather belong to the States than have to put up with another 5 years of Justin Trudeau and the Liberals.
He was very disrespectful to Canada. If it was to happen, I'd worry about health care, because they do seem to have lots of issues with health care. I think our government needs to step up and stand up for ourselves and find some other areas that we can work with other countries as well, not just to rely on the U.S.
As criticisms of Trump's proposal continues to grow, the idea of annexing Canada as the 51st state of the United States is met with skepticism among Canadians. Beyond the initial reactions, the proposal raises questions about the intentions behind it and the potential impact it could have on relations between both countries once Trump assumes the presidency of the United States again. For BridgeCityNews, I'm Heidi Echevarria.
Continuing on his just like Justin stance, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is speaking out about Canada's head banker. In a post on X, Poilievre says, quote, carbon tax carney is the ultimate Liberal insider. He's the chair of Trudeau's task force on economic growth and advised the Liberal government for years before that. And now he campaigns for the same Liberal policies that tax your work, double housing costs, and will hike the carbon tax to 61 cents per litre, just like Justin, end quote. Now, Heritage Minister Pascal Saint-Onge says talk from Pierre Poilievre's about killing an information source for Canadians could have consequences given changes with some social media giants. Saint-Onge says the leader's promise to defund the CBC is, quote, consequential, and that she's worried that he is willing to sell Canada to these tech geeks and willing to destroy our independent news ecosystem, end quote. She says the issue shouldn't be about left or right-wing politics, or even if you like the CBC or not. Well, Los Angeles fires could reach an estimated $30 billion for insurers, according to a report released this week by Wells Fargo and Goldman Sachs. And the report adds that after accounting for non-insured damages, the total cost will balloon to $40 billion. The ongoing fires appear to be the costliest wildfire event in California history and one of the costliest natural disasters in U.S. history. More than 12,000 homes and other structures have burned. At least 24 people are dead, with more than a dozen others unaccounted for. About 92,000 people remain under a mandatory evacuation order, and another 89,000 are under evacuation warnings. And one of those who lost nearly everything is Edmonton-raised trumpeter Jens Linderman, who says he's counting on his music to help carry him through the loss of his Pacific Palisades home.
The feeling when you know you're about to evacuate, so you go through the process of grabbing things that are important, your absolutely most critical things, your marriage license, your passports, papers that you need. Those are already prepared. And then you have a little bit of time to grab the things that you think would mean something to you. Interestingly for me, that was, I had a collection of 35 trumpets and I grabbed 8 of them quickly. And the very first one I grabbed was a horn that was given to me by the great Doc Severinsen. So you reach for things that they're significant. I describe it as a way that you don't really fully understand. You just think you have to have them. In the aftermath, as I said, it's a process that I'm still processing emotionally because some of it is rational and some of it isn't rational. But I think it's the things that mean something to you on a very, very deep level that you reach for.
Protests have been gathering across Alberta as a public hearing into a contentious coal mining proposal resumes today in Calgary. The protests aim to voice environmental concerns regarding the Grassy Mountain coal mining project. The project is proposed by Australian company Northback Holdings, who plan to mine metallurgical coal in a mountainous area just north of Crow's Nest Pass. The Alberta Energy Regulator began hearings to approve the project in early December in Pincher Creek. Once it finishes in Calgary, the regulator will have 90 days to decide whether Northback can start drilling. In Lethbridge, a protest occurred around 3rd Avenue on Saturday, where similar environmental concerns are shared in the region, including the possibility of mass amounts of selenium finding its way into the Old Man River. The municipality of Crow's Nest Pass held a referendum in November, which found 71% of residents in favor of the project. The hearings in Calgary will continue into the week. The Canadian Union of Public Employees says more than 200 educational support workers in a school district north of Edmonton are on strike until there's a settlement with their employer. It comes a day after over 3,000 union members in the provincial capital walked off their jobs, demanding wage increases. The workers are demanding that they call fair wages from the Edmonton Public School Board and Sturgeon Public School Division. Kelly Salisbury, president of the CUPE local representing support staff in the Sturgeon Public School Division, says people aren't willing to take those jobs at the pay now being offered. School support workers include administrative staff, education assistants, and cafeteria workers.
Well, the government has capped what the school board can offer us. The school board is currently offering us 2.75%. The cost of living has gone up by 30%. Our members are not able to sustain life right now. We're not asking for a lot. We're just asking to be able to pay our bills, not have to hold a second job, and not have to visit a food bank. We're not being unreasonable. We're just asking for a livable wage. We're not asking for trips to Mexico or Mercedes. We're asking to be able to pay our bills. We're asking to be able to sustain life here in Alberta. A lot of our members say they can't afford to strike, but they can't afford not to. They're willing to do this as long as it takes to get a livable wage. Strike pay is not a lot, but we're going to do everything we can with the resources we have to support them.
A Lethbridge man is one of 5 people arrested in High Level in an incident regarding a firearms complaint. On January 12th, High Level RCMP and Crime Reduction Unit responded to a report on a firearm discharge at a house where it's believed that the suspects were attempting to break in with reports of a fight. 3 men and 2 women were arrested, including 31-year-old Jamie Holland of Lethbridge, who faces 17 charges, including firearms and drug charges. RCMP also seized suspected cocaine and 2,800 unstamped cigarettes. Hollands was remanded with a court date for the 15th before the Alberta Court of Justice in Chathé. Crews with the City of Lethbridge continue to fix a wastewater pipe leak in the Oldman River Valley. The city first addressed the problem last Thursday at the site down the path near the University of Lethbridge. This week, the city wants to make the public aware of closures to the pathways on the west side of the Oldman River, as well as the north lane of Whoop Up Drive westbound, in order that crews can access the site. The city assures that no significant amount of wastewater has made its way into the Oldman River.
The siphon we're talking about is actually 3 pipes. One pipe has been closed, which is the one that we suspect has the leak on it. So the other 2 pipes are still in operation. Services to Westside residents have not been affected by this repair. They have started mobilizing equipment today by accessing the site from Whoop Up Drive. So you'll see lane closure and some pathways are impacted by their work.
Motorists are asked to use caution when driving on Whoop Up Drive from the hours of 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. until Friday when the lane is closed. Pedestrians are also asked to avoid the surrounding trails for as long as crews continue to fix the siphon. Work is expected to be completed by January 31st. The Princess of Wales says her cancer is in remission. In a social media post, Kate says the news comes following a visit to the hospital where she's been receiving treatment. Her Kensington Palace office says she is, quote, gradually returning to public engagements. She announced in September that she had completed chemotherapy. Here in southern Alberta, we had some plus temperatures, but the gusty winds made it feel much, much cooler. But will the wind be sticking around? And what about those temperatures? Well, I'll be back right after the break with the full forecast. Welcome back. Well, it looks like we will have some decent weather for the next day or 2, but we are plunging into the deep freeze very soon, as you can see. So we've got some plus temperatures here. Wednesday looking like 6 degrees, 9 for the high on Thursday rather. Friday we are plunging down to -6, and we could see a slight possibility of some flurries as well on Friday evening. Saturday and Sunday, look at that weekend. Okay, if you love the cold, this weekend is for you. Otherwise, maybe stay inside. -17 for the expected high on Saturday, and then -11 on Sunday, and then up to -1 on Monday to round out that 7-day forecast. So we're starting to plunge further than that -14, which is the average low for this time of year. But the average high is -2, which we have been above that, and we will be for the next day or so. Okay, so looking at our records here in Lethbridge, 13 was the record high, happening back in 1942, and in 1950 was the record low, -39. Sunrise this morning at 8:24, sunset this afternoon at 4:58 p.m. We're seeing 2 minutes more daylight today than we saw yesterday, so 8 minutes and 8 hours rather, 34 minutes of daylight. Sunshine on the coast tomorrow. Victoria could see a few more clouds though throughout the day. 7 for the high there. Mix of sun and cloud in Vancouver with a high of 6 degrees. Edmonton sitting at 4 and 10 10 for the high in Calgary, with clearing skies in both of those cities. As we see the rest of the prairies here, Saskatoon and Regina, looking at the slight minuses here in the temperature. -1 for the high in Saskatoon, -2 in Regina, clear skies in both of those cities. Winnipeg could see some light periods of snow and blowing snow with 30 to 50 winds and a high of 1 degree. As we look to the central portion of the country, let's see what Toronto is doing. We're seeing 40% chance of flurries there with a high of -3, -7 for the high in Ottawa, and -6 in Montreal, with a mix of sun and clouds in both of those cities. We are seeing a little bit more precipitation, though, as we look further east. So 40% chance in Fredericton, -3 for the high. Halifax sitting at -1 with a chance of flurries as well. 2 to 4 centimeters expected in Charlottetown tomorrow with -1 for the high there, and a high of 0 in St. John's with 40% chance of flurries there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. The cost of insured damages caused by severe weather last year hit a record high, totaling more than $8 billion. Catastrophe Indices and Quantification says in a report that the cost of insured damage was $8.55 billion for 2024, topping the previous record of $6.2 billion from 2016, when wildfires tore through Fort McMurray, Alberta. The season saw $3 billion in damages related to a hailstorm in Calgary in August, $2.7 billion in Quebec as residents had their power knocked out by the remnants of Hurricane Debbie, while the Jasper wildfire caused $1.1 billion in insured damage. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says the summer of 2024 stood out as the most destructive season in Canadian history for insured losses. The federal government has paused an incentive program that offered rebates for buying or leasing electric vehicles. Transport Canada's website now says the incentives for zero-emission vehicles program has been paused as funds have been fully committed. The program had promised up to $5,000 back to customers until March 31st, or once all available funding had been accessed. It says over 546,000 vehicles were leased or sold with incentives through the program since it began in 2019. Ottawa has mandated that 20% of all new vehicles sold must be electric by 2026 and 100% by 2035. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 52 basis points today to 24,588. The Dow was also up 221 points to 42,518. The S&P 500 was up 6 points to 5,842, and the Nasdaq was down 43 points to 19,044. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 84 cents to 77.98 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 3 cents to 3.70 US. Gold was up 14.80 to 26.8830 US an ounce, and silver was up 6 cents to 30.15 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.52 per bushel, barley is at $6.58, canola is at $14.63, and corn is at $8.26 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was left unchanged and sits at $197.40. Feeder cattle January contract were up $2.25 to $2.74.10, and lean hogs February contract were up 45 cents to $83.62. And the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours and sits at 69.70 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Ottawa has pledged to spend $1.3 billion to tackle the issue of border security to deter U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on Canadian goods. But Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he has yet to see anything on this front. Ford estimates that Ontario could lose almost 500,000 jobs if the U.S. tariffs are imposed. Meanwhile, the Saskatchewan government says it's sending 16 provincial law enforcement officers to the Canada-U.S. border to shore up security. Political leaders across the country are freaking out about Trump's tariff talk, and they are not united in how they want to deal with his threats. After the break, I speak with Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley about this and the Bank of Canada's Margaret Carney's alleged connection to Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. That is right after the break. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website anytime to check out a number of our stories and interviews. Less than a week until Donald Trump is sworn in as president, and as Canadians look to see what happens with the threat of tariffs, we have Alberta Premier Danielle Smith talking about a national unity crisis, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford talking about an early election. To weigh in on this is Brian Lilley, columnist with the Toronto Sun. Brian, welcome back. Great to have you once again.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay, so political leaders across the country appear to be freaking out about Trump's tariff talk. We're calling it Trump's tariff talk. So is this warranted?
Absolutely, because we don't know what's coming. And a 25% tariff on the Canadian economy would be massive. So, I mean, just for Alberta's sake, generally speaking, Western Canadian Select oil trades at a discount of about 18 to 20%, roughly speaking. I mean, people will forgive me if I'm slightly off on what today's spot price is, but it's about 18 to 20% discount. So you slap a 25% tariff on that. If the Americans do that to Canadian oil exports to the United States, well, suddenly Alberta oil is more expensive than West Texas Intermediate, which is the benchmark for the United States. Okay, well, are they going to still buy it? Well, in some instances, yes, they will, because they have to. Alberta oil tends to be heavier. We're not talking sweet Texas crude. We're talking a heavier oil that's used in a lot of industrial products. It's used in things like asphalt. And so they're going to need that still, or they're going to have to buy it from Venezuela or Iran or places like that where they don't want to be doing business. But that's going to cause problems. You look at auto exports from Canada to the US. Yes, we assemble a lot of cars here, but the big business now are automotive parts, and parts will go back and forth across the border. You know, we keep hearing this 7 or 8 times. And so you might start out with a part made in a plant in southwestern Ontario, and it goes across to Michigan and gets something else added to it. And then it goes to a different factory, it gets something else added to it, and then it gets put into the assembled car. Well, so are we going to have a tariff of 25% each time it crosses the border? If so, that's going to be problematic. You think about fish, you think about lobster, you think about lumber, all the products that we sell to the United States. This is a massive disruption to the Canadian economy, and one that we can ill afford.
Yeah. Now, Alberta Premier Smith just got back from a chummy trip with Trump, although she has been very blunt that she doesn't want any tariffs on Alberta oil, and she doesn't want the federal government to block oil exports either. So how is her message being received in central and eastern Canada, Brian?
So, Danielle Smith is speaking up for her province, and she is saying, look, we want an exemption. We don't think there should be tariffs on oil. Now, that said, in her media availability after Mar-a-Lago on Monday morning, she was very blunt. We should all expect these tariffs to come in, and they're going to hit all of us. So that includes Alberta oil, but she doesn't want it on there. That message is being seen as not being a team player among some other premiers and business leaders, because there is the possibility, because of how much oil that the Americans import from Canada, there is the possibility that there could be a carve out for that. Well, if there's a carve out for that, why not auto parts? Why not softwood lumber? Why not something else? And so if we're all going to get hit, the feeling is that we should all work together. Now, Premier Smith rightly feels that, okay, look, we've got a government in Ottawa that has been doing everything in its power to undermine the oil and gas sector. I mean, they shut down Energy East. They stopped Northern Gateway Pipeline. They have stopped other export avenues for Alberta oil and gas, or Saskatchewan oil and gas, or, to an even more limited degree from Manitoba. So all of this is being shut down. And now you want to use Alberta oil and gas as a leveraging chip? Excuse me. Why is it suddenly a great industry now when you need it to fight back against Trump tariffs? But before that, the Trudeau Liberals were trying to shut it down with emissions caps, production caps, everything else. The Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill. So I understand where she's coming from, but if you're sitting out here, you can also look at where other premiers are coming from and say, all right, are we fighting as a team or are we not? Both sides have valid arguments.
Right. And of course, you mentioned the premiers there, and all premiers will be meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau on Wednesday. And so while they are doing this and they're trying to make it look like they're united, it doesn't seem like they are. And a lot of people in Alberta are expecting that the other premiers are going to gang up on Alberta Premier Danielle Smith along with the Prime Minister. So is this a valid fear?
I would say so. Look, I've spoken to several premiers over the past few weeks about this. Premier Ford, Premier Fury in Newfoundland, Premier Smith, Premier Moe, and we've heard from others that I haven't spoken to directly. Premier Fury out in Newfoundland and Labrador, he just wants to fight the Americans, was my takeaway. Okay, well, that's great. Newfoundland and Labrador, guess what? They don't have a direct border connection with the United States. They're a very small population. They're a very small economy. Doesn't matter to them compared to Alberta or even more so Ontario. You talk to David Eby in British Columbia. He wants to fight the Americans. It's this anti-American, let's go, rah, rah. Look, I get that can be a bit of a rallying cry, but economically, it is stupid. So which is the better view between Danielle Smith, who doesn't want to threaten anything, and Doug Ford, who says, look, I want to make a deal with you, but if you don't, I will hit back hard. Doug Ford has threatened to cut off energy exports from Ontario. Now, that's not oil and gas. That is, electricity exports to New York State, to Pennsylvania, to Michigan. A lot of people will look at that and say, that's how you deal with Donald Trump. Others will say, no, Danielle Smith has the better way. I don't know which one's going to work because Donald Trump is so unpredictable, let's say. But when you look at this as a whole, I get where Danielle Smith is coming from when she says, look at a map. You threatened to cut off oil exports to the United States, which Melanie Joly, Trudeau's foreign affairs minister, did. What did Premier Smith say? Look at a map, figure out where Line 5 goes. Before Line 5 gets to Ontario, Sarnia, Ontario, where 50% of the jet fuel for Pearson Airport is processed, it goes through Michigan. Well, if we've got to send it through Michigan, where they take a lot of product off, well, guess what? They can stop it from going through to Ontario, which then also feeds Ontario, but also Quebec via Line 9. There's a lot of moving parts here, Jeanette. This is a very difficult time that we're in.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned Premier Ford there. So why is Ford talking about possibly needing to go to an early election due to the tariffs?
So Ontario has a fixed election date law, which in a Westminster parliamentary system like we all have in Canada, that means absolutely nothing. As I've been saying since these laws first started to pop up, they are worthless. You can break them at any time. Pretty much the first or second line in every version of a fixed election date law I've seen in Canada says nothing precludes the Governor General or the Lieutenant Governor from exercising their duty, meaning calling an early election. And so Ford is looking at an election in June of 2026, and he's been toying with the idea, even before the Trump tariffs, of going early, just for political expediency. Now his argument is he may have to spend tens of billions of dollars. We're talking 50, 80, $100 billion over the next year or two to prop up companies and workforces here in the province of Ontario in order to deal with the tariffs. If the tariffs start coming in, maybe, he hasn't said what he'll do, but I'll point to this. When Trump brought in all kinds of tariffs on China, it did not end up killing off Chinese exports because the Chinese government subsidized them. So does the Ontario government backstop companies that have to pay these tariffs? Do they sell at a 25% discount so that it ends up being the same? We're going to have to wait and see. But the province has run the numbers, and they say that it's between 450 to 500,000 people could lose their jobs as a result of these tariffs. That's massive. Right now in the province, we've got a high unemployment rate of 7.5%. That's 662,000 people unemployed at the moment. You add another 500,000 to that, you're talking about an economy that is cratering. And so Ford says if he's got to spend that kind of money, he thinks that he should take it to the voters and let them decide if they back that idea or if they want to shut it down.
My gosh. Okay, well, speaking of voting, it looks like the Liberal leadership race is sort of ramping up here with Trudeau's decision to step down. So we're now seeing a few people come forward, even though Liberals say that they're going to tighten their rules for who can vote. But you say there's a real problem with this race, and you're calling for all parties to change their rules. Why, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely, all parties need to change their rules. The Liberals have the loosest rules, but they're not the only ones that don't follow the rules that we have for a general election. My oldest son, who's now in his mid-20s, he voted in his first leadership race for the Conservative Party of Canada when he was 16. What business does a 16-year-old have voting in a leadership race when they can't vote in a general election?
Interesting.
So, but if you're voting inside the Conservative Party, you've got to be a citizen or a permanent resident. Until this past week, the Liberals, they would allow non-citizens to vote. You just had to ordinarily reside in the district. So we heard all about that in the foreign interference inquiry. We had Chinese exchange students voting to support Han Dong, the Liberal candidate in Don Valley North. People in Toronto can't find Don Valley North on a map. I bet you can't out in Lethbridge. But the Chinese government could, and they were interested in that. So do you think they're going to be interested in trying to manipulate in any way they can the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada, which if you win the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada, guess what? You are the de facto prime minister of a G7 country. The Liberals have said, oh no, we're not going to allow non-citizens to vote anymore. We're just going to allow citizens and permanent residents. Well, wait a minute. Permanent residents are not citizens, and they're not allowed to vote in a general election. I think that whether it's the Liberals, the New Democrats, the Bloc, the Conservatives, if you are a federal party that wants to contest in a federal election, Elections Canada should say to you that every nomination you have and every leadership election you have, you must follow the same rules as Elections Canada lays out in a general election. A couple of years ago, Jeanette, if you had asked me that, I would have said, no, these are private clubs. We don't need the government involved. But we've seen through the foreign interference inquiry what's happened. And now, do you remember when Pierre Poilievre announced he was running to be leader of the Conservative Party, and he said, I'm running to be Prime Minister of Canada? Mm-hmm. And the Liberals all scoffed, nobody runs to be Prime Minister of Canada. Elizabeth May even said that recently when Donald Trump suggested Wayne Gretzky run to be Prime Minister. She said, nobody runs to be Prime Minister. Well, guess what? Since Justin Trudeau stepped down, we've got a bunch of Liberals running to be Prime Minister of Canada. And people who are not allowed to vote in a general election will help select our new PM. That is crazy.
Right. And you mentioned your son being 16 when he voted. Well, I think the rules now are 14, right? So the age limit's going down.
Yeah, 14 for the Liberals. I believe it's 14 in the NDP, but they would not allow people who were not permanent residents to vote. The Liberals had the loosest rules. They've tightened them up, but only slightly. And that's why we need to come to a common system for all parties. And I think it should be what we use in a general election.
Right. Yeah. We're almost out of time here, but speaking of this liberal leadership race, we've seen more people announce that they're dropping out of the leadership race than jumping in, it seems. And we haven't heard much from former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, although I believe she has forms up on the Liberal website to collect the signatures required to enter the race. So we might be hearing from her soon. But it looks like both Mark Carney and former BC Premier Christy Clark have been active. But Brian, you say not all of it's good. Why do you say this?
Well, I mean, last week, Christy Clark did an interview with CBC where she denied that she had ever been a member of the Conservative Party, even though she had boasted about joining the Conservative Party to vote for Jean Charest to try and stop Pierre Poilievre. In 2020, she mused about running for the Conservative leadership after Andrew Scheer dropped out. And so, look, there's a lot of problems with Christy Clark. She may have killed off her own campaign before it even started. Mark Carney has had to answer questions about why he was hanging around with a woman who is now known as one of the world's most well-known and renowned sex traffickers. Back in 2013, that's long before she was ever charged. But why was she there? Well, he gave an understandable explanation. Longtime friend of his sister-in-law. He didn't know anything about what was going on, all of that. He's also, facing questions about why he basically announced his candidacy on the Jon Stewart show, on the Daily Show in the United States. So, a few different things going on. Freeland's been fairly quiet, but she's expected to jump in. We've also got a lot of also-rans saying that they're going to run, but at $350,000 an entrance fee, good luck raising that if you're not a serious contender.
Oh my goodness, exactly. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, Brian, but once again, thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Most of us have a love-hate relationship with our computers, don't we? They, along with the internet, have made it so easy to connect with friends around the world, and at the same time have made it easy for the bad guys to commit cyber crimes. So joining us to chat about this today is Stephen Graham. He is a computer information technology instructor at Lethbridge Polytechnic. Welcome, Stephen. Good to have you with us today.
Good to be here. Thanks, Jeanette.
Awesome. Okay, so Stephen, how bad are things with cybersecurity issues these days? Are we gaining ground against cyber criminals, or are they getting more and more clever? It does seem like they're getting more clever, doesn't it?
It does. It's a cat and mouse game. Every time we get better at securing, they get better at breaking, and
Yeah.
it's an age-old story. Ever since we put locks on the doors to our house, people have figured out where to find the windows.
True, exactly. So what are the most common cyber threat? Is it malware?
So probably the most common threat that we actually see the result from is malware, and that could be something like ransomware or cryptojacking or malicious deletion of files or participating in other kinds of attacks. Denial of service is one that we hear a lot about in the news. A lot of it comes down to how that malware gets there, and often it's either through some kind of phishing attack or some kind of like man in the middle kind of attack.
Right. Can you maybe explain the basics of how a malware attack takes place?
Sure. So malware is really just any software that gets installed on your computer that does something bad. And it can get onto your computer a variety of ways. Usually it requires you, the computer user, to install something. And you can do it intentionally or you can do it unwittingly. Quite often we'll see that you'll get an email that says, hey, here's an important bank statement, or here's a shipping information from FedEx or Amazon or some other big name company. And you've probably had one of those.
I've had tons of those, and they come through text messages on your phone too.
Yeah, so you click on it, and it takes you to a website, and you say, well, you have to open this file. So you need to download this app to open this file. And as soon as you download that app and install it, you have invited somebody into your house. Malware's like vampires. They don't get in unless you invite them, usually.
Yeah, and they don't get out very easily either.
They will not go away, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it almost makes you a little bit suspicious from anything then, because it just seems like every day now there's some sort of an app that we have to download onto our computer. I mean, are most of these safe? Is it mostly the ones that are coming to us that are sort of uninvited, that are unprompted? It just suddenly showed up. Those are the ones we have to be really suspicious of.
We should be pretty suspicious of the ones where somebody says, "Here's new software, you should install it." You should be suspicious of that. It's sort of like restaurant food. You go to a restaurant, you pick from the menu, you choose what you're going to get. If somebody walks up to you on the street and says, "Here's some of my food, you should eat it now," maybe you want to give that a second thought. So when you're working if you work at a company, the company, you'll get an email from HR or from the IT department that says, "We're upgrading this. You should go to this site here and install this." Maybe you want to check and make sure it came from your IT department, but then do the thing that you have to do. If you're just at home and you want to play the newest version of a game, go to an app store. Most of the apps on the two big app stores for your phones are fairly well vetted. Uh, but if somebody out of the blue emails you and says, "Oh, you need to install this right away," the alarm bells should go off. If you don't recognize who they are, if there's some kind of urgency implied, like you must do it within 12 hours or the world comes to an end, or if they're directly asking for money or information about you.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
that makes sense.
And
Def-
those alarm bells are really the signs for a phishing attack, where somebody wants something from you, like access to your computer or access to your company, or just more information about you, like your banking or your social insurance number or any of that.
Yeah, your spidey senses should start tingling for sure if that's happening, right?
Right? Yes.
Now, Stephen, we all love a good deal, right? And as we browse the internet, we get, of course, bombarded with pop-up ads. And I understand that some of these can be malware. So how can we recognize what malware is opposed to what it isn't? And most importantly, what are the tools that we can use to protect ourselves against it?
So a lot of that pop-up thing, advertising is advertising, and it's don't let your spidey senses work in this case. If it feels kind of sketchy, maybe it is kind of sketchy. Maybe the deal is too good to be true. When you're presented with a link, you'll click on it because you want to see more about the deal on shoes. I'm looking for shoes. That's why that one pops to mind. And I'm looking for a good deal on shoes. And this one pops up, and I click on it, and it says on the ad that it's for such and such, but then I see immediately in my browser that it's some other place. I'm no longer at insert big name shoe company here. I'm at something else, right? So right away, that's a stop doing things kind of moment. So once you start clicking on things, that's where you're giving your computer permission to do the work. So you just kind of need to really take a look at whether what's being presented to you is actually connecting to the right place.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And of course, you mentioned this off the top there with phishing scams. And I understand that these phishing scams are still one of the top problems out there. So can you explain how these work and what we should do to avoid these?
Yeah. So from the purpose of a phishing scam in the big picture is to get information from you, either directly about you so that they can access your personal finances or personal anything, or to get enough information about you that they could impersonate you to someone else and pretend to be you to get someone else to trust them because they trust you. Right. So that's the whole purpose. So the way it usually works is someone will approach you by email or by text and say, "I'm so and so, and I really need some information about this," or you need to enter your password on this website because it's being compromised. Really, what they're looking for is, what is your password, so that they can immediately go and change your password, and now they own your account.
Yeah.
And
Scary stuff.
that is super terrible. So one of the strongest ways to combat that currently is using what's called two-factor authentication. Uh, and a lot of people don't like it, but it's very secure. So when I go to log in, I go to the site that I know, not to the site that they direct me to. I would go to my Amazon or my Google or my Facebooks or wherever I'm going, and I put in my username and my password, and then it sends my email or my cell phone a code. And then I have to be in physical possession of that other thing to be able to log in. Right. So, unless somebody steals your phone and it does this, you're going to be pretty safe, because without that code, you can't get in.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I love those. You're right. It can be a little bit daunting and annoying, but yeah, I feel more secure when that happens for
Yeah.
sure.
So if you do accidentally disclose some personal information about yourself that allows somebody to try and hack your account, you still have the peace of mind where it says, "Hey, a login attempt happened here." If that happened, maybe you want to check that you're still secure.
Right. Now, every so often, we also hear about another ransomware attack with criminals demanding big bucks. So how do these work, and what can businesses do to prevent these from happening?
So yeah, ransomware is terrible. It gets its name simply from the kidnapping aspect. But these kidnappers aren't going to return your whatever they've stolen, probably. So how it works is, once you've let that software into your system, it will begin to encrypt everything. So it locks it all up with a password that's only known to the ransomer, and they will demand outrageous sums of money, or even rageous, I guess, sums of money to unlock and release your data. There is no guarantee that they'll do that. If they've already broken your system, you might not trust them to do that as well. So the first line of defense is education. Don't let people into your network who aren't supposed to be there. Don't open software that you're not supposed to be there. Avoid the malware in the first place. So that's the first line of defense. The second line of defense is keep separated backups. So if you're a business, you should have a backup plan. Talk to your IT provider about making sure that you have a solid IT backup plan, where your data are frequently taken off the system and stored separately where they can't be manipulated. So then if you unfortunately fall victim to a ransomware attack, you can say, I guess we just bite that day's worth of data loss, and we restore from the backup, and we carry on as if we're in business.
Yeah. Now, to what degree are business owners investing in cybersecurity to prevent these kinds of attacks? And I mean, we're talking major money here, aren't we?
I imagine so. That's not really my strong suit. I don't know a lot about that business economics side. I know that the larger the business, the very much more money they will spend. In assessing cybersecurity risk, we often talk about footprint. And so the footprint of a larger organization is larger. And so you have more real estate, as it were, to protect more data, more information, and it's more valuable. It's more lucrative for the bad guys, as it were, to come in. So the larger the company, probably the more is spent. A lot of smaller companies maybe don't spend as much attention as they should, maybe, simply because, well, I just run a mom and pop shop. Nobody's interested in my data. But maybe they are. If you get 100 mom and pop shops for $1,000 each, that's $100,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
So,
exactly.
and when it comes down to your business, how much can you afford to not be in business? How long can you be out of off the market?
It's like
So,
insurance in a sense, isn't it?
absolutely, it is part of business continuity. What do you do if your computer systems go down? Like, at all, but certainly at the hands of somebody nefarious, that'd be bad.
Yeah,
Or
definitely.
and even the damage to reputation. If I've been phished, and someone were to then go out and send emails from my email account or from my Facebook account saying, "Hey, I just discovered this great thing," what damage to my reputation does that bring? What damage does that bring to my company or my institution?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen those before with some of our
Yes, we
friends
have.
on online, and it just doesn't sound like them. It seems a little suspicious, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
getting back to businesses, it seems then reasonable for businesses to start hiring more cybersecurity professionals. So how much demand is there now for hiring these tech people to provide this security?
There's a pretty steady but growing demand for this as people become more aware of the risks and it becomes, well, back to the finances of it, the risk that you have to mitigate. It becomes a very good place to be if you're in the IT field. Again, with smaller companies, there's maybe a little bit less of it, but certainly there are IT companies around that will have people on staff that have some cybersecurity training that can help you as a smaller business mitigate that. If you're a larger business, you probably have your own IT department, and somebody on your staff probably should be responsible for cybersecurity.
Yeah. As a member of the public, we all have gone to hotels and used public Wi-Fi, restaurants, hotels, library. How safe is that?
I'm gonna go against what most people think, and I mean it's mostly safe. The kind of attack you would get on a public Wi-Fi is typically what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, and that's where you think you're talking to the hotel Wi-Fi, but you're really talking to the criminal in room 308, and the criminal in room 308 has their Wi-Fi set to Marriott or wherever you're staying, and then they're passing it through to the hotel or whatever, and so they can see all the traffic that you're sending. Right? That's what it is, and it's probably not good. Like I would not want to discuss a lot of I wouldn't do my banking over that. I wouldn't send any corporate messaging over that. But you can subscribe to VPN services, or quite often, if you're in a large organization, your company has a VPN policy. So even if there is somebody in the middle listening, everything is encrypted, so they can't figure out what you're saying.
Wow. Well, Stephen, it looks like we're out of time here, but it's such a big topic. We could have asked. I had so many more questions for you here, but we'll have to have you back on. But we appreciate you coming on today, Stephen.
Thank you so much for having me, and just check your email. Stay safe.
Thank you. Stephen Graham is a computer information technology instructor at Lethbridge Polytechnic. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.